for it to say recording has started. So we'll cut this part out. I'm Rob Akins. I'm the director of the Professional Development Corps for the Delaware CTR Excel program. We're going to talk about Biosketches today. So I just want to do a quick introduction. There's only a few of us on right now, and we can introduce people when they get on. I've been at Nemours for, believe it or not, 30 years with a number of successful grants that I've been able to acquire on my own, and I've helped quite a number of people be able to secure grants for themselves, including all different levels, from pilots through RO1s and even bigger grants. And as lead for the Professional Development Corps and the Corps in general, we're trying to figure out ways to facilitate understanding of all the different components for NIH grants, this one being the Biosketch, without you having to beat your head against the wall. Just sort of some advice and places where you can get information about what you need to do. Biosketch is a critical part of any grant submission because it's, if you think about how a reviewer would use a Biosketch, especially if you're the PI, it's your chance an opportunity to convince them that you're the right person to do the work that's being proposed. So they'll take a look at and we'll go over the components of a Biosketch, of what you've included, what your previous work has been, your contributions to science, the literature you've been able to publish, and all that stuff's important. But one of the most critical parts is the personal statement at the very beginning. So we'll talk about all those different things. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. So NIH has gotten significantly better at the way their web pages are set up. So they're getting good at that. One of the things that's a little disruptive is they keep changing the specific details. So this is the website, which I'll put the link in the chat in a second. You can find it on their webpage. It is kept up to date with the most current information, including when there's transitions in forms. In the forms, like down here, it says Forms H at the bottom here. When they update the package of information that you have to submit for a grant, they're just going through the alphabet. So Forms H just came out end of January of this year. The Biosketch, since that's our topic, except for the expiration date kind of on the form, the Biosketch didn't change with Forms H. So it's the same as in Forms G. So they've been good about making sure all that information is available, but it is pretty confusing about what's changing when and what are you supposed to do. And since none of us write grants every day, it's worth checking out the instructions and sort of the examples that they post on their website. Is this big enough for you guys to see? I can zoom in maybe a little bit.
I think it's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
All right. So there is a resource. Here, let me put this in the chat. Oh, I can't put it in. Do you have this, Aaron? Can you put that into the chat? I can't put it in the chat without unsharing. But let's go through quickly. So the Forms H Biosketch, the Biosketches are required in just about everything that you submit, and they're required for grant application, and they're required at different stages along the way. So it's a great idea to keep your Biosketch up to date as much as possible. On the page, and we're on Forms H, so on the page, they have a Biosketch format, which is the same as what we would use as faculty. But some of the details and the instructions, if you're applying for a fellowship, are a little bit different. So if you have fellows that are writing for F grants, you should direct them to these instructions and some examples of fellowship ones. We're going to go to the non-fellowship form. And then I already opened, I opened it and then closed it. Let me open it again. The form itself is not terribly, I see it's a download. Right, so the form itself that they distribute is not terribly informative. The top part here has not changed in a very long time. The thing that changes and that you should be aware of is this OMB approval date. So the Forms G went through mid or the end of 2023. Forms H goes through 2026. That is one of the things that'll get especially from OSP, that'll get your Biosketch kicked back. So if you have an old Biosketch, say from last year, and all you want to do is update it to the new forms, all you have to do, because everything else on here is exactly the same, is copy and paste that header with the approval dates. and then the entirety of the form that they give you, it's your name. The position title should be the one that's most relevant to, and some of us have more than one. You guys probably all have more than one. Most relevant to the application. And then you should know your ERA Commons username. You need to have that. You need to have it to submit, and you need to include it on your BioSketch. So I'm old enough. Some of them are a little weird. I'm old enough that my ERA Commons is RAKINS, which is I think unusual these days. Then and I'll show you some examples of these where you trained, and this is professional training in postdoctoral and residency. Once you become kind of more of a real person, that goes below, right? So there's positions below in section B. The personal statement we'll talk a lot about. One thing that changed over the past few years, besides that date at the top, is that this used to be positions and honors, and now it's positions and scientific appointments and honors. There's a section for contributions to science. If you have a really old biosketch or someone sends you one as an example and it has a section D, that is no longer included. So the section D part of a biosketch, which was your other support, like the grants and things that you already have, and whether or not they conflict with what you're asking for, that is now a different form, which we'll talk about another time. And that is it. So this is all the help they give you with the actual form itself. Go back here. They do have pretty detailed instructions so within that page, so I just opened the form, there's also this instructions link. That's the one I had opened. So there are specific instructions that they provide for each of the sections. So one question, I know mostly you want to talk about your biosketch, but I'm going to quickly go through who needs to give you a biosketch. So anyone that's considered senior or key personnel, that means they're contributing intellectually and by function to the execution, the development of the study, the design of it, and the execution of it. So if you have a fellow or a graduate student or a medical student that's working with you, they're not key personnel. I mean, they're important and they're probably critical for the success of the grant, but they're not considered key personnel. So think if you can change them over in the middle and still be able to do the study, then they're not really key personnel. There is another category. So senior key personnel, the PI is one of those, have to provide a biosketch. Other significant contributors, and I'm just going to click on that, which is a category that's a little bit confusing. There we go. So these are people, I have something blocked. I hope you don't see that little thing that's blocking this. But these are people that contribute to the development and execution, which would typically make them key personnel, but they're not committing any specified measurable effort, like person months project. So they're usually indicated as 0. So if you're a lab person and you're collaborating with a clinician and the clinician is working on the project and helping you identify patients to enroll, this happens with me, but they're not committing specific time because they're basically continuing their role with you based on the fact that they're a clinician who works with the patient population, that they go on as other significant contributors. And once they're listed, then they can put it on their CV. They can list it as participating, but they're not charging any specific effort. So the rule is if you're above a 5%, I think is the cutoff, then you're a key person. If you're contributing about 5% effort, but you're not asking for any funds, you're borderline an other significant contributor. But especially if you're not going to charge the grant for your activities, then you're OSC. So if you're the PI on the grant, which you guys are PIs on this proposal you're working on, anybody else that's key and anybody else that's an other significant contributor has to provide you with a biosketch. That's what's required by NIH, which is where these are going to go. For the CTR grant mechanism, because it's a cooperative grant, everything goes up to NIH, so we have to follow all of their rules. So one more example of how you might have an other significant contributor who provides a biosketch is a mentor. So I'm a mentor in a number of grants with individuals. Typically, I don't charge their grant for my time as a mentor because it's part of what my role is with CTR, for example, or my role at Nemours. But they want my Biosketch to go in, so it goes in as an other significant contributor. Okay. Um, there's specific details in here. We already talked about ERA Commons. And really, this is the meat of what you should be looking at if you have a question about how to fill out parts of the Biosketch. We'll come back to personal statement in a second. So one other thing, when you're looking at these directions, and I don't know why, some of these are in reverse chronological order. So you start with the newest thing first, and then work backwards, right? So I don't even know if mine's set up that way, but I haven't gotten dinged on it yet. I think most people would think, well, your scientific appointments, you start with the oldest thing and go first, but it's supposed to be in reverse chronological order. And that highlights the most important things, what you're doing right now first. Some other places in OSP will point these things out to you. When you list things, they're in chronological order. All right, so let's talk a little bit about your contributions to science section. And there's an extensive kind of review here of what to include. So your positions and what you're working on, your positions now and going backwards, sort of that first section here. Oops, now I lost it. So those positions are critical for the review, right? Try to put yourself in the reviewer's position of trying to figure out if you're a good risk for the investment, right? Because they're going to give you a bunch of money and they want to know that you can handle it. So they want to see what positions you've had, what's your experience been. And then typically, well, actually, I read the personal statement first, but typically I would look at positions first after that and then contributions. So the contribution is you can put up to 5 different things that you've contributed to. And you typically wouldn't make these more than about a half a page each. And each one you can put 4 examples of 4 outputs. They don't have to be papers, but papers are pretty typical from that contribution, right? And these are anything, and this is a little tricky to calibrate, and it's a little tricky to present to more than one person because it's very personalized in what you did, say back. So you worked on something as a fellow that turned into a big deal at the institution where you did your fellowship, and you were a critical component, or your component was important to that thing, whatever it is, that practice change or that discovery happening. You want to put that in as a contribution so that the reviewers can see, oh, look, they've been productive. They've done these other things. So the contribution would have to, what's the framework for what you did, what the key part was, the central finding of that, and then it's really critical to keep this in mind. It's not the contribution of the work. It's your contribution to the work that you want to highlight. Again, that's what the document is for. So you need to say something about the central findings and the historical nature of this, but what did you do is what the reviewer really wants to know. So for each one, you can say it up to 4, and I'll show you, I don't know if I pulled up mine, but there's a sample Biosketch that we can look at. So you put up to 4. Um, you can mention things that aren't out yet, but there's a specific policy about how to reference those. So if you've got something on medRxiv, you can reference it actually in your grant. And then when it becomes accepted for publication, officially accepted for publication, at least before the study section meets, I think it's 30 or 60 days before the study section meets, you can inform them and it'll go into your package that you got that accepted. All right, so we'll go through some specific examples, but the key for the contributions, it's your contribution, and it's okay if you're young, like just getting started in research. No one's expecting a lot, and there's sort of a balance point where you don't want to take credit for too much, right? It's sort of you don't want to put 5 things on if you just finished your fellowship and are just starting and writing grants for the first time, or you've been working clinically and now you're just getting started. Unless you've got specific contributions that you would like to highlight. And think that if you were talking to someone to convince them to give you the money and they wonder, well, you're being interviewed, what did you do in the past? that's similar to this or that supports your ability to do this, those are the things that you want to put in. Okay. And we can go, if anyone has them, we can go through and look at your specific contributions. All right. And then the personal statement, again, not to kick this too much, this is sort of, if I was interviewing you, say I'm the reviewer, why would I give you this? Right? You're supposed to use in your biosketch, and a lot of people don't do this, why you are well suited to the role. Parts of your training, previous publications, previous work you've done, things you've developed, how you're working with the collaborators on the grant or within the same scientific environment. So if you're proposing a grant that has multiple collaborators, I always mention them in the personal statement. And then typically you also, as with the multiple other sections, you get 4 examples. So if I'm writing a grant, say with one of you guys, and we've published papers together, those are the ones I'm going to put at the bottom. Even if I'm in the middle someplace, right? The idea is I'm wanting to convince the reviewers that I can do this, I know how to run this, and I've been working with these folks before. Okay. The last thing I'll point out for this is that it's not just manuscripts. What they say, and if I highlight this, um, I'll put that into, right? So the research products can be any of a number of different things. It doesn't have to be a publication, although those are the ones, that's kind of the gold standard that reviewers are most used to. But if you've got conference proceedings, posters, especially if they're particularly strong or invited, if you have a patent, if you've developed a database or educational aids or developed a curriculum, especially if that's relevant or directly relevant to what you are proposing in the current grant, then you can put it in as a research product. The one thing you can't do, although you used to be able to, is to put hyperlinks. So you can you can't put those in. You can put the digital object identifier. You can put ways that someone can go find the thing you're talking about, but you can't hyperlink. It's not allowed. I think there were some instances where the text would say one thing and the hyperlink was something else. And really, the reviewers aren't supposed to click on any hyperlinks anyway. So if they want to copy a DOI, a digital object identifier, and pop it in themselves and go, look, that's up to them. But there's no hyperlinks anymore. All right, so what did I do with this? Hang on, I have to unshare for 1 second. I find this example. I don't want you guys to see how many thousands of things I have open. Okay. All right, so let's look at this. This is a sample that NIH posts, right? Down. All right, so this is an old one, right? So the first thing you always check is this data up here. So this one was some version of Forms G. There's another one that I think ends in August or something like that. And then the 2026 one is Forms H. You can still use them, even if they're associated or you got them from a different form set, as long as that date is still current during the submission process, then you can still use it. But the easiest thing to do is just to cut and paste. As long as there wasn't some change in the headings, for example, is to cut and paste that in. All right, I think this is a real person. I'm not 100% sure of that, but you can see that's their ERA Commons login. This is the simplicity of what you should put in here in terms of your training. It's really, if it's not a degree, you can put like a description on what it was, but this is all training and education. When you're done, month and year, and then the field, that's it. You can try to get more information in there if you want to, but that's what people are looking for. When did you finish? Sort of how long ago did you do those aspects of your training? And then let's parse out what this is short. Actually, you can go a lot longer than this. The total length of a biosketch is 5 pages. That's everything included. So and so there's a real estate issue about how you divide things up. 5 pages is actually a lot of space. You can get a lot of information in. So this is their description. They talk about themselves. Their research is focused on neuropsychological changes associated with substance use disorders. That's actually, I didn't pull that, but that's what the grant is associated with. They talk about their specific background. And then and some people do it in this order, some people do it in another order. I usually start off by saying what I'm going to do with the grant, but that's personal preference. Once you have kind of the rubric set up for how you like to do your personal statements and how you think they read well, all you have to do is go in and update it along the way, right? So she talks about her position and what her background is associated with the work that she wants to do. She's been PI or co-investigator on university NIH funded grants. She laid the groundwork for proposed research by developing effective measures, right? Disability, depression, those things are then reflected. If you go down into her biosketch, those things are reflected in her work products and in her contributions. So she goes all the way through her contribution, then why that makes her a good candidate to be the PI for this, right? So she starts here. As a result of all that, she knows how to be a PI. So PI is not just running the project itself or knowing the science, which you need to do. If you have more than one person, which you always do in a grant, you have to be able to manage them, manage the planning, the timeline, the budget, that everything builds out of the logical progression. And then she took advantage of this. There's an opportunity in the biosketch, to talk about any interruptions, anything that you want the um, reviewers to know, that she had a disruption. But overall, she has the expertise, leadership training, expertise and motivation. She has expertise twice to successfully carry out the proposed research. So that's one of the two. I think there's two on here. And it's short, right? I'll show you, I'll pull up one of mine in a second. Oh, they took the other one down. Hang on 1 second. Talk amongst yourselves. Actually, if anybody has a question on those parts so far.
I have a question.
Mhm.
If I did like basic science research way back in my undergrad years, like many, many eons ago, but it has no relevance to my current proposal, do I include that under the contributions to science?
If you contributed, so if the work you did way back then contributed to the publication or intellectually contributed, right? A lot of people work on things,
Uh-huh.
then you could include
Yes.
it. But it will be, usually that far back, it's not. Most of the
Relevant, right?
reviewers wouldn't, right? Because it's not a strong indicator of what you're able to do now,
Got it.
right?
Okay.
You can. I know that's not
Okay.
not a
No,
specific
no.
answer.
Yeah, I think someone who told me about under contribution science on that section to explain the papers that I've written that I've been my publications and stuff. So
Mhm.
I was in those publications eons ago, but it has no relevance to what I do now. So that's why my questions, do I have to include those? It has no relevance.
There's no, well, first, there's no have to. This is
Okay.
your representation, right, of what you're
Yeah.
working on.
Okay.
Um, so you don't have to include it. The question you have to ask yourself is, if someone read it, would it help them make a decision to fund you, to let you
Okay.
do this? Okay.
Got it.
All right. So the example that NIH gives, what is this? I don't know what this biosketch is for. I found one of mine. So we'll see. Share. Okay, and there's something I didn't point it out in the other biosketch, but there's something that I do and that other people do that's not required, but that's helpful. So you can see this one's good through 2024. The dates are all over the place. So this is still forms G1. So I forget, because of this specific mechanism. Um, so I always start off, I'll be the contact MPI. That's what I'm doing, who I'm working with, sort of what my role is. And then this one, this is from talking to the program officer because of this particular mechanism. I didn't do a traditional academic postdoctoral fellowship at a university. So I explained that in here because my funding, a lot of my funding now has to do with program development as opposed to research. So she thought it would be helpful to put it in there. I don't know how much of this you want to go through. I am happy to go through in detail why all of this is in this particular one. It's a shift. This project that I'm submitting for now is a shift in focus from what I had R01 funding for before. So I talk about that because it involves a number of junior people who I work with on the grant, and I'm sort of the anchor for making sure that all of that works together. I put in my experience with professional development of clinical and translational scientists, how many people I've worked with directly, and then the current grants that I have in that regard. And that all kind of ties back into my non-traditional, my non-university, right? I've been at Nemours for a long time, so I came shortly after getting my PhD after doing a short fellowship. And then I talk about my interests in the complexity and the computational modeling, which is part of the proposal that this one goes with. So this is a grant that's going in. So this Biosketch hasn't been submitted yet. And then one of the things I do, so my sequence is usually what am I doing on this grant? Anything in particular that might be different about thinking about my role in this grant, which is this whole big section. And then I talk about my specific interests and what I've worked on and how that fits into my ability to do this. And I end by recent examples of my collaborative studies in these areas are below. And so the first thing, and this is also in the other example, you can highlight, not everyone does this, you can highlight ongoing and recently completed projects. This information used to be, you remember section D is now a different document. This is sort of a way to get some of that information into the personal statement that used to be in the forms D. So these are just grants that I have. And then I will highlight, so these aren't necessarily, I mean, these are the publications, oh, this has to be updated because there's a newer one. These are publications with the group. So the folks that are mentioned in here are mentioned in the grant. I always highlight my name. Mona's a MPI on this particular grant, Batish, so she's highlighted also. But those are the four things. And I know I'm old, so I have a bunch of things I can pick from as work products, and that happens as you get old. But I always pick things that are supportive of what is being proposed, right? So in this context, all these folks are working together on this new project, and here's some examples of things we've been working on. I did do it right. So my position, scientific appointments, and honors, it also is a trick, just highlight things that you want to draw their attention to. So you remember I mentioned that a big part of this grant that's being submitted for is my knowledge of NIH and my ability to coordinate all this stuff and help train people. So I highlight the review committees, NIH panels, and things that I've been on. Again, don't worry about the fact that you won't have as many because you haven't accumulated as many scars, I think, along the way yet. Right. And then I still do my contributions of science from older to newer. I don't know if there's any guidance on that. No one's ever said anything, although a friend of mine suggested switching them around. So this is just an example. This is from a long time ago. Like really, you can see the dates, 1992. So how old I am. So this is from graduate school. So I was lucky enough to work on projects to develop methodologies for protein analysis and a lot of computational work. So I just summarize what I did. So I actually led those things, including two that became patents. So those are things I highlight, and then I put in what the impact has been. So I haven't looked or worked on this in a very long time, but the technologies that I developed are used commonly. It turns out they're used a lot in plant labs for some reason. I don't know why, but they're used fairly commonly, and they're noted. And multiple different kind of texts and instructional manuals. So that's the context of the contributions to science. All right, and I do all 5. And at the very bottom, you can list. You don't have to, but it is recommended that you list your entire bibliography through this NCBI. I don't know if this. I could tell this is. I think this still has a link in it, which I have to remove to be able to submit it. Let's go here. So if you are not familiar with my NCBI, National Center for Biotechnology Information, let's take a look real quick. I don't know, how can do I have to do this? I don't know. Where's when I was away? We'll edit this out too, right? When I was away last week, I got kicked off the network because they saw I was away logging in, and now I can't even paste any information. So if you go, so let's do this. Now I got to log in. But we'll come back to this at the end if you guys want to do that. But the MyNCBI has, you have an account there, which you can log in all these different ways. It links now to ORCID, although I'm not sure how efficient that is. And you can tell by the way I'm talking about it, I don't use it for my Biosketches, but you can, and other people do. But what it does is it aggregates all the information you need to make a Biosketch. And then when you want one, you can just go in and click on the things you want and it'll pull it together into a Biosketch. In general, I think that could be helpful, but in general, my Biosketches don't shift that much. You kind of have a trajectory that you're working on so that you have a Biosketch and then the next grant, you just edit that one and save it back and make sure that it's the right date. But we can go into that if you guys want to see that. It does allow you to have a complete list of your online accessible publications. So the link at the bottom, my Biosketch, this one, right? This NCBI link, if I could paste it into the, try one more time. No, it's not letting me do it. It's very annoying. Or we can set up a time to talk about it separately. So there were a couple, these are just tweeted out, but I'd seen things like this before. Because I follow a lot of nerds, I guess, who do NIH stuff. So this is just a recommendation. I don't know who wrote it originally, but it was followed by NIH. So the personal statement is what I told you is tell me why you're qualified to lead this project. That's what your personal statement. That's what the whole thing is about. Any previous grants of similar complexity or nature. So even if it was a different topic, if it was something that you did that was of a similar type, that's great. Anything that demonstrates your expertise in any, this is especially important if you have a complex team, any collaborations, right? We all know that you can, I can write a letter for anybody. If we don't actually work together and we've never worked together and there's no facile way for us to work together, we're not going to do the thing that we put into the letter. And everybody knows that. So most of the time reviewers want to see a prior relationship if at all possible. This one suggests to briefly introduce or describe the project, what the thing is that you're applying for right now, and in the main paragraph, that's supposed to be a paragraph, describe the expertise, your prior everything, your collaborators and team. You can list 3 to 5. You can actually only list 4, so that you should just take the average of those 2, and that those highlight your expertise and your collaborative efforts. And then this is an example from one of, I don't know who Justin Demick is, but this is an example, right? So following the rules that he just set up, right? But I think it's, well, the reason I wanted to put it in here is because I think this is great, the way he works it. I usually put this at the end. So my narrative is, this is my role, this is why it's important, this is how that all fits together. But the idea, this idea, which is a little bit different, is to talk about the project first. I have the requisite clinical and scientific experience to serve as primary investigator for this project, and then goes into the details of what he's worked on, and then talks about these. This is old enough, so you used to be able to do 5, it's now 4. But the content of the personal statement I thought was very good. All right. So now we can open things for questions, or if you guys have specific, those are some tips and tricks. The best thing to do, if I can make it a suggestion, is to write your bio sketch. Don't leave it because it's kind of a pain in the neck to deal with. But write your bio sketch early and then send it to people to review. In fact, the one suggestion on writing the grant or any grant altogether is, parts of it take intense focus. You just have to chunk off time and be able to really think about it and word things, write creatively. Other things don't take a whole lot of mental effort, it's just time. So when you're tired or you just have a little bit of time, those are the things you should work on. And the bio sketch, I think, is one of those. So this is in the example posted on NIH, just to go back, because I do the same thing. This ongoing and recently completed projects that I would like to highlight, and then the articles that they wanted to highlight. And one of their contributions, it'll look very similar. The flavor of them, and they look similar because the content, the amount of information, sort of this convergent evolution. When people think about what they're trying to do with a biosketch and their contributions to science, they come up with the same solution. So it's, what was your role? What did you do? Why was it important? What was your role in it? And what was the impact? And then examples of that work. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and let's open it. You guys have any questions? There's something in the chat.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Hello, nice to meet you, Dr. Akins.
How are you?
I'm Dr. Shahidul Islam from Delaware State University. I recently joined, so I'm writing for some grants. I am also like you, I'm a computational biochemist, you can say, and my research is using mainly computational tools and machine learning as well to understand protein systems. My question, I have multiple questions. Like one of them is about the contribution to science. Now, the project that I'm writing, the grant that I'm writing right now, do I have to be focusing more on the similar topics in the contribution of science? Because since computational chemistry or biochemistry is a broad field, you can work on protein system, you can also work on polymer, you can also investigate chemical system. So the way my research have been, like, I started protein simulations modeling from my postdoc at University of Chicago. And then ever since I have been doing mainly protein and bio macromolecule simulations, modeling, and all those things. But in my PhD, I have done computational, like DFT, ab initio, those things. And while I have been more focused on protein simulation, I have been collaborating with experimental scientists who for them I did those calculations as well. So I have some publications every year. I have some publications that are not related to protein, but related to chemistry in general. So should they be going to my contribution of science? Because They are not particularly my projects. I was helping them. I'm also a co-author
Mhm.
in publications.
So, so the answer is yes. And I think the the biggest suggestion I can make is to think about the document a little bit differently. So you mentioned projects, but it's really not the project. The document is about you. So you participated in a project and your contribution, you mentioned collaborations, or you worked on DFT, or you, right, there are, if you flipped that around a little bit and how you're thinking about it, then you should include it, but then highlight what you did that supported the project and try to do that. And your contributions to science, once you draft them a few times, they don't change a whole lot just
Uh-huh.
because that's what you did. But the times that I would change mine is to highlight something that goes with the project. Like the RO1 I showed you is collaborative. There's multiple people working on it. And you mentioned that you had collaborated with multiple groups to
Yes.
provide analyses. So that's great. If you have a collaborative proposal and you collaborated with a lot of people, you should highlight that in your contributions to science, even though it wasn't your project, right? Because it's not about the project, it's about you. And it's a
Yeah.
good idea to include, anything that you're proud of working on, um, and that you had a contribution to, even if it didn't turn into a paper. I've seen GitHub pages, just sort of people help build data sets or they help build analytical approaches, and they explain exactly what their role was, and then here's the GitHub if you want to go look at it to see what they ended up with. So I think about it that way, but I would definitely include all of the things that you mentioned and just think about, um, if, let's say, maybe think about it this way. Let's say you were going to interview someone for the job of running this project that you designed, right? So you've got this grant, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to interview someone to for the role, principal investigator. What would you ask them? What contributions would you want to see from them to justify you trusting them to do it? Right? You're just going to give them the keys, give them the money, and you got to go do something else. Because that's in a way what the document does. It represents you to these reviewers so that they can understand why you're the one to do this project. Right. So I
Mm.
think if you think about it that way, the contributions that you mentioned should all go in. Just don't oversell. Certainly don't undersell, but don't oversell things. If it's clear, when you put the publication down, if you're not first or last or sort of like in a position, a corresponding author or something, make sure you don't take credit for the whole thing, but you should certainly take credit for what you did.
Uh-huh.
Does that help you, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of thinking from the reviewer's perspective and the project's perspective. Like, say, if I am looking at a disease now,
Mhm,
I mean, if they see that, okay, he has been doing this for last 5, 6 years, but before that, he was mainly looking at polymers or inorganic molecules. They have now direct relationship with any disease.
mhm.
So that's what I'm concerned about.
Well, but
Uh,
you can take advantage of the personal statement to explain the trajectory from
okay.
working on polymers. And I've
Yeah.
seen people do, and then you became interested in, biopolymers, and biological processes, and just explain how you went from A to B, in the personal statement, and then your contributions to science will make sense to the reviewer when they read through them.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So you are saying that I should include those in a way to show them a transition, how I'm changing from A to B.
Yes, you
All right.
should, because I know I keep suggesting taking different points of view, but that's really a good way to think about these documents. So let's take the contrary example where you get a biosketch, and it's exactly what you said. This person is working on a hardcore polymer chemistry. It
Right.
is not bio. I mean, maybe they're bio derived or something, but it is not biological. And now all of a sudden they're doing biology, or they're working on, clinically more relevant or biologically more relevant. You would want to know, well, what you would ask. How did you make that? Like, what was that transition all about if you were interviewing them? So knowing that, because the reviewers are not any different than you or I. They're just their task is to evaluate this document and come up with basically in their own minds, this person's qualified or they're not. So take advantage of that. The fact that you did that, you have this immense background in polymer chemistry that helps inform what you're working on now, and just explain the transition in like a sentence. It doesn't have to be long, so that they won't have that question in their heads.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Other
I
questions?
have one other question. So regarding the format of the papers, is there any format, or like we can use any way we can?
That's excellent. I don't know that there's any specified format. Let me. I don't think there is. Not that I can look through. And Aaron, I might ask you to send out a note to the whole group. What you want is short and sweet. I don't recall any specific guidance on how the references have to be formatted.
If you guys give me a second, I can share an email. Somebody asked about references, so just give me 1 second while I pull it up. So the comment was you can organize them using any standard format like APA or AMA or other regarding numbering using the same numbering system in the specific aims, research approach, and human subjects, vertebrate animal section, if relevant, is best. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it might give you a little bit more information.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this makes sense. Actually, I've been using the format that is shown in the examples that you guys are sharing. I just found that for some of the articles or papers that I publish, they have no PubMed PMID. Sometimes they are called PMCID, sometimes they are called PMID. I'm not familiar with those things too much, but some of them has it, some doesn't.
So you should, if you have, so there are two different identifiers, PMID and PMCID. But let's go back for 1 second to something that Aaron said. I was just trying to think through how I do it. I mean, I'm trying to minimize work. I just use the same format that I use in the bibliography, which is I use Nature, right? So I have I use EndNote for referencing. So I just use exactly the same thing that's in my bibliography for the grant, right? So it's the same format. So I just pick Nature, and they have certain, I like it in the text because it's a small superscript, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. So that, and Aaron also mentioned that the reference number that you would use, which I've never done, and actually I've never seen, that the reference number from the grant that you can put in, I just label them A, B, C, D. I think that's the standard way to do it. But the idea that you could put in this is reference number X in the grant, I kind of like that. So you can tie it back together. But I have not seen that. So the PMID and the PMCID are critical. In fact, NIH used to require PMCIDs. They definitely require PMCIDs in your reporting. So when you get a grant and you publish using the grant funds, you have to tell NIH about that, and you have to acknowledge NIH in the publication. Hang on 1 second. Oh, man, I can't talk and navigate. So that accounting is done through the PubMed Central, which is PMC identification. Okay.
And while Rob is looking, I just want to share some of the feedback that I heard from the pre-application was that biosketches that were submitted didn't necessarily match the application. So please make sure you're checking not only your biosketch, but anyone else you are submitting with your application. Make sure the personal statement is for the principal investigator. make sure what is said in that personal statement matches any letters of support. So it goes back to what we talked with Dr. Aldifer and the mentoring plans and the IDPs. Everything has to match and it has to go to the correct applicant. Otherwise, reviewers pick that up and it does become a ding on the application.
And they're very good at picking it up because they've all been dinged on it in the past. So I'm going to open one more thing and I just have to sign in here. All right, I'm not going to open one more thing. I'm just going to show these two. So the PMID, there's a interface called PubMed, which if you're not familiar with it, you should be using it. So it's the National Library of Medicine. In fact, it's the NCBI, the same folks that do the National Center for Biotechnology Information, the same folks that do the Biosketch links do PubMed. So PubMed just aggregates and lists journal articles. So this is just one from a couple years ago. It was the first one that popped up for me. So the PubMed ID is a unique identifier in the PubMed system. The PubMed is great. It's fine. It's, you know, a large number of references are included. The one that matters to NIH is PubMed Central. So I'm going to click on this. So PubMed Central is actually freely accessible. So when you take federal funds for work and you publish that work has to eventually be accessible through PubMed Central. So a lot of journals, a lot of publishers now automatically deposit the articles for you. The other thing I was going to open is how you have to do it if you have to do it on your own, which is a NIH manuscript system. But we can deal with that if it comes up down the road. But the two referencing systems are related. So this is the abstract. This is the information. You know, these are the cited by and all that other stuff. That's PubMed. And then PubMed gives you the links over here. So this was just a review that we did for the journal Personalized Medicine. And then it gives you the PubMed Central link, which is free. This is the one that matters. So every article, eventually, every article that's funded by NIH or funded by federal funds has to have a PMC ID, which always starts with the 3 letters PMC. And that's a unique identifier for that paper. So I think I have my Biosketch still open. Right, so I always put those at the end of every article. In fact, they're in the EndNote library that I keep, has PubMed Central IDs in it. So if you don't, let me see if I have any other ones. Like old stuff, I forget what the date is. Right, so this right here, this is just ancient because like I said, I'm old. If there's no PMC ID, if one wasn't assigned, and you only have a short amount of time to get a PMC ID assigned for your article. So this is from 92 or something. So that predates the requirement for PMC ID. So I don't even think I can get one for this article. But for every other one where I could get one, you know, unless it was a work product that's not curated in those databases, I put the PMC ID in. So the example that they gave, the NIH gave, does not have PMC IDs in it. Oh, it does. It has one. I would put them in. If you have trouble getting them for your old papers, which may be true, but if you have chemistry papers, for example, they may not even be in PubMed, let alone in PubMed Central. But if they were federally funded, I know it's not necessarily your grant, but if they were federally funded, they're supposed to be in PubMed Central.
Yes, for some of the papers, like when those not like biological, like in organic chemistry, I don't see any PM CID.
Yeah.
So I can definitely get them if I submit.
You can, if you're the corresponding author, did you write them? Were you the corresponding
Yes,
author?
some of them I wrote.
Yeah, it's the National Institutes of Health manuscript system. You can deposit them through the NAHMS. I was going to show it, but as soon as I got there, it told me to log in. I'm like, I can't remember my login.
Okay.
Another
Anyway,
thing,
so much for this information.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Anybody else have questions? Okay. Aaron, is there anything else? Hey.
This is Aditya. I had a question. So this wasn't a direct question about the biosketch. Oh, by the way, everything that he covered was super helpful. Thank you so much. So this came up with a statement that Aaron made for the letters of support, especially the one that is required from the department chair. Who should that be addressed to?
Oh, if it doesn't, so I don't know what it says in the RFA, right, for the one that you're applying for. If it doesn't, then whoever's in charge of the program, so that's, oh, he's blanked on her
Susan
name.
Martin in this case?
Yeah, Susan Martin is the, right, Morton. You can address it to her, or sometimes I just address them to dear colleague or dear review, section member. It's a good question because a lot of times it's not clear who you're sending the letter to, but Suzanne Morton is the one you should address it to.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. All right, does anybody have parts of their biosketch? I know we're at time. If anybody has parts of their biosketch that they want to look at specifically, you can ask Aaron. You should definitely, be talking to your mentor about it and showing them the accumulation of biosketches in, for NIH, when you submit your R01 or your whatever grant you're going to submit down the road, it's key personnel and other significant contributors. So if you have, you might have a lab manager who is actually critical to the entire grant, execution of the grant. But if what she's doing is operational and she's running the study, as opposed, which isn't always true, sometimes she's designing the study, she just goes into other personnel. So everybody else goes in another category. You still explain what they're working on, but you don't have to give a biosketch. But anybody that you need a biosketch from, it'll be in the RFA if it's different than that general rule. But the PI is responsible for all those biosketches being correct, which is kind of a pain in the neck, especially given that you don't have a lot of bandwidth. Any of us have a lot of bandwidth to deal with it. So does anybody have trouble in terms of the number of people they need biosketches from? Good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for your attention. Let us know if you have any other questions we can help with. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Akins.
You're welcome.
Thank you.